When disaster strikes, recovery doesn't begin with cleanup or in the immediate aftermath. It starts long before the rains fall or bad things happen. And smart planning and preparation can make a tremendous difference. So one of the most overlooked parts of being ready to recover is financial and insurance readiness. That's where Commissioner Carter Lawrence with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance comes in. And Carter, if you'd take us through what being ready to recover means from an insurance and financial perspective, and what are things you think Tennesseans can do to be better prepared for disaster?
Yeah, first, thanks so much, Patrick. And let me build off what you mentioned about being prepared and doing work in advance, because while it's not a lot of work, what we always urge Tennesseans to do is to get prepared in advance. So kind of three quick things that I would mention from an insurance perspective are really important. The first is to talk regularly with your insurance producer. And I also put in a plug to make sure that you've got a properly licensed insurance representative that you're speaking with, and you can always check that on our website. But the purpose of talking with that person is to make sure that you are matching your needs with your coverage. And when you talk regularly with your insurance producer, you're able to understand what your policy coverage is and what's excluded, which is absolutely critical to understand. For the second piece, in addition to knowing what's covered, is to make sure that you store your policy in a place that's accessible. Because as you know, when disaster strikes, it can be difficult to obtain documents that are really important and you need in the aftermath of disasters. So that might mean cloud storage, so you can access it from anywhere. It might mean storage in a bank. It might mean storage in a locked safe in your home. But making sure that you have those documents that you can go to in the aftermath of a disaster to be able to check to make sure that you've got the coverage that you need and to file the claims that you would need. Then the final piece about doing some work in advance to be prepared in advance or in preparation for a disaster is to make sure that you chronicle all of your belongings. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. I think probably the easiest one is an app that's available from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And you can find that on the App Store, on Google, any of the major app sites. And it lets you go through and record what your belongings are, group them by rooms in your house so that in the unfortunate event that you do have to file a claim after a disaster, you're able to go in and do that a lot more effectively and be compensated a lot more quickly as well.
Yeah, I mean, memory is not good enough when it comes to trying to file a claim or document what your belongings actually were.
Right.
And I know for myself, like I have a locked file cabinet that I keep all our insurance documents in, and my wife's got it organized by whoever the policy is through. And then I redundant. So I have iCloud and Google Drive both, and I know other people use Dropbox or some other file systems, but to make sure that we have it, and in case something happens where we can't get to it at our house, that we can get to them.
Yeah, unsurprising that you are prepared, but that would be my message for Tennesseans as well, to have the redundancies to make sure that you're able to access those documents in the event of a disaster.
Yeah, thanks. So what's one thing you think that many Tennesseans have misconceptions about when it comes to insurance?
Yeah, probably the most common misconception that we see is one of the most unfortunate ones, and that's the lack of flood coverage in a traditional homeowner's policy. So a traditional homeowner's policy does not cover all perils. Flood is one of the excluded perils, as are earthquakes as well. And so as we saw last year after Hurricane Helene with the really unprecedented flooding that we experienced in Northeast Tennessee, a lot of people thought, well, I have a homeowner's policy, I should be covered. And unfortunately, that's not the case because of specific policy exclusions. So I mentioned earlier about talking regularly with your insurance producer, and one of the pieces that would come from those conversations is making sure that you're matching your coverage with your needs. If you live someplace where it rains, you live someplace where it can flood. And rebuilding after a flood where you don't have flood coverage is obviously going to be incredibly difficult. And so while the policy isn't going to protect you from the flooding, it's going to make the difference in your recovery efforts. And so unfortunately, a very common misconception in the same way that earthquake coverage is not a component of traditional homeowners. And Tennessee, as you know, Patrick, is seismically active across the state.
It is.
Obviously, West Tennessee, most notably with the New Madrid fault line, has the greatest risk, but we would encourage all Tennesseans to evaluate the risk on earthquake coverage and consider speaking with their licensed insurance producer about their potential need for coverage for earthquake as well.
Yeah. And, I think I hear so often from disaster survivors or people who have lost things after a flood that they didn't realize that they could have flood insurance. And um, I think almost every residential structure in the state of Tennessee can be insured through the National Flood Insurance Program. There's also private flood insurance that's available, but I wish more folks took advantage, and it can be expensive, but for folks that live in a floodplain, we talk about them in ways that make it seem like flooding is a remote possibility. The 100-year flood, the 1% flood. And, what practically that's meant is that there's a 27% chance over the life of a 30-year mortgage that they're going to file a flood claim. And that sounds a lot different than 100-year or 1%.
That's right.
So I wish more people had at least minimal coverage, because federal and state disaster aid just won't make people whole.
That's right.
It's not designed to, and won't come close to helping meet all the needs. It's really just intended to help people make sure that they can meet those immediate life needs. And I wish more people listened and paid attention to making sure they had adequate coverages.
Yeah, we appreciate TEMA's partnership on pushing the message about the preparation, including the financial preparation, because really that's what insurance is. It's that financial preparation for disaster. And you mentioned the cost of it. And, especially when you've got a federal insurance program, it's not necessarily going to be priced the absolute best way. But regardless of the pricing structure, and when we're talking about homes, we're talking about, for the vast majority of us, our most valuable asset. And making sure that we are protecting it properly is the right thing to do for ourselves, our families. And it's the difference between, like what you said, just having your immediate needs met versus being able to come back and thrive again in recovery.
That's right. And then it's so important, I think, for people to thrive or to be stronger in the broken places.
That's right.
After a disaster. Carter, when you think about Tennessee's unique challenges, our geography, our hydrology, our weather patterns, and how our communities are designed, how should that shape how people think about insurance?
Mm-hmm. Well, Tennessee is blessed to have a lot of rural communities. So we've got areas that are kind of far-flung that can be more difficult in the immediate aftermath of a disaster from a recovery perspective. There might be just single-lane roads going into an area for which it can be difficult for adjusters first and then contractors later to go out into those areas. So while it can be a blessing, particularly in those agricultural rural areas, it can also be more difficult from a recovery perspective and something of a challenge. So one of the reminders that we have in the aftermath of a disaster is to be really aware of fraudsters. Unfortunately, some of the worst people turn up after disasters, just like some of the best, because I know that you see a lot of the best in Tennesseans after a disaster when neighbors are turning up to help out. But we have particularly out-of-state people who are not properly licensed who will show up, and they're just chasing storms, and they are promising to put up a roof on a house, and they will take a deposit, and they'll skip town never to show up again. So we have on our website the ability for Tennesseans to go and verify the license status of the people who are showing up after a storm to make sure that you're only going to choose someone who is properly licensed and that you can trust is going to show up to finish the job. So just another plug that I would make on the aftermath of a disaster, that you're doing those little pieces. They're a little bit of extra work, but that have the possibility of paying huge dividends down the road.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's so important. Being properly licensed in the state of Tennessee, I think, is such an important thing. And the fact that your organization, TDCI, makes that available for Tennesseans, I think it's just incredibly valuable. And people aren't necessarily thinking about checking vendor, if someone's licensed after disasters, and just a moment of due diligence and then being cautious with your funds and not feeling pressured. I think that's something else that people are in such a hurry sometimes after they've lost something, or they're trying to fix something on their homes after a disaster. And that time pressure leads us sometimes to not make great decisions. And just giving yourselves the ability to do your own due diligence and
That's right.
buy yourself decision space, I think is so important for disaster survivors. And
Yep. Couldn't have said it better. I totally agree.
yeah. So is there anything else you think is important for Tennesseans to know as they're thinking about their financial and insurance readiness?
Yeah, let me take the opportunity to just once again plug having those at least annual conversations with your properly licensed insurance producer. I've talked several times now about the need to understand what an individual homeowner's needs are and how that matches with the coverage options that are out there. But lots of people they renovate a bathroom or they replace part of a kitchen, and those are changes that people might not think about that can change their need from a coverage perspective. But if you have conversations with your producer, then you're going to understand about what you might need to do from a coverage perspective. So I just really want to encourage people to have those conversations with their producers. But if I could add one other piece as well, Commerce and Insurance, we regulate all lines of insurance in the state. And so I encourage anytime someone thinks that they might have been taken advantage of, to file a complaint with us. We have a consumer insurance services division that assists consumers every single day. We return tens of millions of dollars back to Tennessee policyholders. Incredibly proud of the great work out of that team, and would encourage, if you've got to file a complaint or if you have questions, to reach out to Commerce and Insurance and let us be an advocate for you and help assist those Tennesseans.
That's great. And I appreciate most businesses, I do think, are trying to do the right thing, but there are bad actors there. And I appreciate the work that Commerce and Insurance does on behalf of Tennesseans to protect them from those that don't have the best interests or good business practices. So really appreciate that.
Thanks. And likewise, appreciate the invaluable work that TEMA does and appreciate this partnership on preparation.
Yeah, now I'm going to go back and look at my home inventory with the tool from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And I've been using spreadsheets for years and walking around and taking video of my home and talking about what's in each room. But having something written like that ahead of time, I think could make me and my family, readier should we find ourselves at the end of a disaster. So thanks so much, Carter. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.